Good afternoon, everyone at WWHF Hackin Fest. My name is Daniel Bardenstein, and I am jealous that everyone is there and not able to join. But thanks so much for joining me late in the afternoon when folks are already getting thirsty for a drink to talk about something I'm very excited about, which is something I've spent the last couple of years doing. And I think it's a really important and not so talked about topic, which is securing down-ballot political campaigns. When we all think about securing elections or campaigns, we often just think in very large terms, the presidentials. We'll get to some other examples that folks talk about. But from what we've seen working with campaigns all the way down the ballot, even down to the state and local arenas, there's a lot going on. And I think there's reason to be, I don't want to say legitimately concerned, but really paying more attention as a community to these really important campaigns and why they might be increasingly appetizing for adversaries. So a little bit about myself first. Like I said, my name is Daniel Bardenstein. I'm a partner at Foresight Partners, which is this non-partisan nonprofit that I lead in my spare time, under which guys I'm here speaking to today. Normally, I lead technology strategy for a government agency that some of you might know called CISA, but I'm not here on behalf of my normal employer, so nothing I say here has anything to do with my work at CISA, nor does not reflect any of their opinions or views or any of those caveats. Before joining government and working on securing political campaigns, my background has mostly been in the private sector, actually building a lot of security technology as a product manager, so building enterprise tools for large organizations. Moved to government to try to make a bit more of an impact. Got to lead cybersecurity for what was called Operation Warp Speed, which was the government's attempt to rapidly research, develop, and distribute COVID-19 vaccines, which was a very interesting experience. Had a little bit of policy background as well from some work I did at the Aspen Institute working in medical devices. But for now, focusing mostly on trying to make the government a little bit more smooth running when it comes to technology and continue to do this support behind the scenes, supporting political campaigns across the country. And there's my Twitter handle in case folks want to stay in touch afterwards, since I can't enjoy LobbyCon or LionCon or any of the actual con things in person. So I wanted to start off with a little bit of a story of how this began, at least for me. I'm not the first person to try to go into political campaign cybersecurity. Many have gone through and don't want to say failed, but have gotten tired of how hard it is to make a change. And there are many many people have come back walking, the direction where we're walking and telling us it's not worth going through. So how did I get into this? So it started for me in 2018, and I was volunteering part-time on a political campaign not too far north from where everyone is right now, in California's 25th district. I was friends with a campaign manager who was running the campaign of an incumbent, a challenger, and it was a really interesting race where, and again, parties are not important here, but there was an established incumbent who was not very popular at the time, and there were two challengers from the opposing party. And so we were early in primary season, and whoever won, the sense was whoever won this primary, kind of the pre-election within each party race, had a very good chance of actually winning the seat and getting sent to the U.S. Congress. So again, it's not necessarily a powerhouse of a city by any means or an area, but again, it still has representation, still sends people to the seat of federal government. And as we all know from especially recent years with the gridlock in Washington, every seat counts, right? So this is, even though it's not necessarily a big city, so to say, every election counts. When I got to the campaign, again, this was a small challenger campaign. So again, challenger, someone who doesn't own the seat, right? The opposite of an incumbent. And so I was asked by my friend to just, help tighten up some security, some tech. I did some data analysis, but, some really egregious things seeing early on, which a lot of us would think is, wouldn't dream of seeing this in an enterprise environment. The website that the candidate was running was using a very questionable, not really established web hosting service for its website. Didn't have access to logs, didn't have many protections enabled, not even SSL enabled on the website, which is one of the first things I had to do. No one was using any sort of multi-factorification. Passwords were being shared and texted. And again, these are people who are not super security savvy nor tech savvy. And as we'll talk about in a little bit, just running at breakneck speed. And just any moment that you're not raising money or trying to get votes, is money wasted. So security is not always top of mind for these folks. And so was able to spend some time, just tightening things up. Again, wasn't really expecting anything particularly exciting, just doing what I can to help make sure that, if anything, it's a little bit of an education exercise, right? And then one Saturday night, I got a frantic call from my friend, the campaign manager, saying, oh, the website's down. We can't access anything. We're just getting a bunch of 404s and we can't log into our web portal anymore. Turns out what actually happened behind the scenes when I jumped in was there was a DDoS attack that took down our campaign website right before a pretty critical fundraising deadline. So I was able to go into the admin panel, which again, because this was a pretty questionable web hosting service, took me a while just to get the right permissions enabled and actually try to figure out whatever logs I could get. And again, what was crazy is after going in and doing a couple of tweaks, enabling Cloudflare and some other little plugins that were enabled, this kept happening. All right. And it wasn't just kind of what we expect to be a very, run-of-the-mill easy, DDoS attack, so to speak. It was actually strangely complex. And we actually got hit 3 or 4 times. So every request was unique coming from this attack. So, every single resource from, the GET requests was unique. The user agent strings were unique, different refers on every request. And traffic was coming from about 20 or so source IPs. And again, because of, the use of technology early on, I couldn't just deploy a full-on kind of Cloudflare protective service around these things, or we're finally able to kind of later on, and just didn't have the money nor the tools to respond quickly. Much longer story. Continuing on kind of what made it so challenging to deal with. Because again, for most of us in our normal jobs, dealing with the DDoS attack, not particularly difficult, and we have the right technology to do that. But like I mentioned, limited access to the network logs. It took me hours, if not days, just to get access to the recent network logs. No admin access, or I couldn't do anything on my own because everything was via this crappy web portal. And part of it, again, the title of the slide, bad tech with bad times. This was a company based in Bulgaria. There were time zone differences. They were very slow in their response. They weren't keen to give me access to the back end where I could actually run some scripts or actually, embed certain scripts on the website to help do additional defensive measures. So as we all know, sometimes you pay for what you get and you don't pay for what you don't get when it comes to technology, which is a very strong learning here. And a very long story short, and this could be maybe its own talk one day, but after these initial DDoS attacks, we were able to kind of harden things up sufficiently. We did some forensics, found out that a lot of the stuff was being launched from EC2 infrastructure, which again, as a private citizen, there's not much you can do. Then we tried to report this to authorities, got radio silence from them. The candidate that I was working with ended up losing the primary race to his opponent at the time. That person that he lost to ended up becoming a congressperson briefly before having to resign due to scandal. Not avoiding names, but you can probably look it up. But after enough silence, actually the campaign manager I was working with finally got Rolling Stone to write up a full-length news article about this attack and kind of the weirdness around it and some of the other, interesting other, I don't want to call them incidents, but there are a couple other campaigns and at that time that were seeing some weirdness on cyberspace. And then as a result of that article, the FBI reached out finally, and we actually started up an FBI investigation, which was interesting to say the least. Showed them my forensics, the logs we were able to get. Turns out the person on the other side of things wasn't very good at OPSEC, used their personal credit card, personal email. They were married to a staffer on the primary opponent's campaign. So there's a pretty strong case there. And then can't go into too much more detail there, but there's still an active case after all this time, which from what I understand, potentially might be the first federal case for domestic electronic election interference in the US. And so we'll see what happens. And there might be some precedents set, but this is all just kind of the story of how I got in here, and we'll see. This was we'll see what happens. And there's a lot of lessons here, especially from the legal perspective and the lack thereof. So we decided to do something about this experience, leaving myself and my partner, who's unfortunately not able to join today. And so our paths, we had worked together at a previous company, and so we rejoined in 2020 and created this group called Foresight. Again, we're not here to sell anything because everything we do is pretty much for free, and it's for a political campaign. So just to give a little bit of background about who we are and what we do and why it's relevant and some of the stuff that we're going to talk about. So we're now as a non-partisan nonprofit. We work across the aisle. just from starting in 2020, I believe we're the largest provider of cyber training to political campaigns in the US. We also developed counter disinformation training and tabletop exercise, along with some additional cybersecurity support that we do. We'll do some custom work that's needed. But we decided to basically jump in the race. We're a registered 501c3, and we have worked with a pretty sizable number of people just in the 2020 cycle alone. So we trained over 1,000 people. That's 150 campaigns, over 15 state parties. So now for 2022, we're looking to have a similar impact, if not a little bit more. And so, given the experience we've had, especially in 2020, we want to walk everyone through what does a political campaign look like? Because there's some things you might expect, but there are also some things that make it a little bit different from, what it might seem like on the outside. So obviously, and again, when I'm talking about political campaigns, I'm not going to talk about your, you might imagine that like if you're Pelosi or Schumer or McConnell, you probably have a pretty well-oiled machine for re-election. You've been doing it long enough. You have teams, you have resources, you have name recognition. I'm going to focus more on the challengers or the lesser known folks, especially at the state level, that don't have that level of resources. So we have really small staff. The candidates, who are kind of the life and blood of the campaign, are really busy and really distracted. And oftentimes, everything, just like in an organization, when culture, security starts with the C-suite of the CEO, same with a political campaign. If we've worked with campaigns where the candidates really care about security and everyone else follows suit, but oftentimes it's the candidate, much like our boards and enterprise situations. That's the one that we have to kind of drag ahead and get them to pay attention. And it's really hard you think candidates might be a little bit more invested because they really want to win. They're investing their own money and their time. But just as a little factoid here, it's expected, if I remember correctly, that political candidates are expected to raise about $1,000 an hour in what they call call time, where they literally just call people and ask for money. And any time that's not spent raising money is lost time and lost money. And $1,000 an hour is a pretty high rate, even if you think for our average corporate lawyer, for example. So those are the types of folks that we're working with and trying to nudge them to be a little bit more secure in their behavior. Political campaigns are also running at hyperspeed. These are 7-day-a-week, definitely more than 8-hour day, and oftentimes more than 10-hour days. But they don't have any money. It's not like they're a well-funded startup that's moving fast, but they have lots of venture funds to invest in good tech. And on top of this, pretty much all these people have a little of any technical knowledge. They just want tech to be there. They want to get free stuff. The campaign I worked at, the website was set up by the sister-in-law of the candidate, right? Which explains some of the early tech decisions that were there. So political campaigns are pretty unique beasts in many ways. And kind of drawing along this theme, same but different. So in some ways, they look like small and medium businesses in the terms of their lack of resources, and maybe they don't have as high a profile for an adversary, but they move significantly faster. So they don't have as much of that tolerance as an SMB might in terms of the ability to decide, take time to decide, or do research on various tools. So that's one way I'm really changing that culturally is quite different. But on the pace side, they're much more similar to tech startups. However, they don't care about longevity. They're all going to burn down after 8 months, right? If the candidate wins or doesn't win, either way, the campaign pretty much dissipates after then. So they don't really care about making like long-term informed tech decisions or living with tech debt or any sort of like configuration debt, which makes things really interesting. And obviously they care about money, not that they have a lot of it to spend on security, which is something that we all know, but they don't have a ton of sensitive data. It's not like they have secretly planned strategies. They have donor data, but oftentimes that's hosted elsewhere. So sometimes there's a little bit less of a concern about, maybe hack and leak could be of a potential concern, but it's not like there's going to be some treasure trove of PII or some sort of, HIPAA, for example, or any sort of sensitive data. And we've seen some pretty surprising things. It's not like we're chasing after, we want to offer this service. We want to educate political campaigns and potentially future elected officials on cybersecurity. But we actually see a good amount of weird activity and also just outdated of just bad tech practices. We see a lot of outdated tech. I was on a call with someone last week that was still using Hotmail for their email and also still using some poor web hosting providers. A lot of really bad password practices, as we're all not surprised about. USBs. This snapshot is a picture of something we actually got. One of the campaigns we worked with in 2020 actually received a mailed envelope with this USB drive, and you may not be able to see it, but it says, thumb drive, thumb drive, thumb drive. Socialism isn't the answer, and some other stuff. And they were really hoping that the political campaign would plug in this USB drive. Obviously, they didn't, because they sent it to us, and we were able to do some analysis, and there would have been bad times on the other side of that. We see a lot of social media account takeovers, which happens increasingly. We see doxing, and we've also seen some physical infiltration. This obviously was a little bit before COVID times, but even there, you think of like your Project Veritas, for example, or other groups that actually try to send, human volunteers, like physically into buildings, either posing as someone who wants to be a volunteer or take screenshots. So we've actually seen both poor tech, but also like active threats against political campaigns in many different. And at the end of the day, what we're trying to do, and what I would try to get the larger community, the security community, to think about, is this is really focused on human-centered security, right? The answer isn't just to throw EDR or any of our, big, expensive enterprise tools at these campaigns, because it's just not going to work. So we really have to focus on how to actually change human behavior, because, in these environments, humans are at the center of the security equation, right? And they also don't have the time or patience to just undergo a bunch of phishing trainings or phishing assessments like we'd also typically do in our normal job. So we really have to think about when we really think about humans and human-centered security, it's really all about behavior change, right? So how, as security professionals, do we get humans to change their behaviors? So you might think, okay, well, there's a lot of stuff out there already there must be stuff out there already in the political campaign world. And there is, but it's mostly all checklists. So the Harvard Kennedy Belfer Center has a big cybersecurity campaign playbook. It's a very long checklist of everything that should be done. The DNC and I believe the RNC both publish security checklists for their campaigns. And there's just checklist galore. But as many of folks in the audience probably know, there's a very difference between just writing out a checklist and handing it to someone and then actually getting understood or implemented well, or verified for that reason. And again, same thing on this initial campaign I worked on. Their central political committee had sent them a checklist of all the cyber stuff they should be doing and the technology stuff, and they were all too busy and didn't care, just did what they needed to. But again, as we continue to see checklist-based security, both in the political campaign world and in the government and enterprise world, doesn't really work well. And so we try to take a different approach. So we start off with a lot of storytelling. And especially, I know we all hate FUD, and FUD as a means of selling security. But especially telling stories that open people's eyes, that are relevant to what people are doing, but also like aren't so far-fetched, or like, oh, the Russians are gonna try to hack your random campaign and this state, right? Like, what are the most realistic scenarios? You can think of this as threat modeling, except we have to do it because the political campaign doesn't have the time or the knowledge. But telling stories really connects with people in terms of getting them to understand what are examples of threats, why should they care, and make sure they don't feel super helpless about it, right? It kind of helps them identify. We have to try to keep the examples really relevant. I can't say how many times, even on a paddle as recently as yesterday, we in security, we like to point out, or whether, often the press will often point out these kind of key canonical examples of like major cyber incidents, whether it's Oldsmar, Colonial Pipeline, or JBS or whatnot. And then kind of, between the press and salespeople, we kind of use these incidents to sell whatever it is that we're selling, even if those stories don't actually resonate with the end customers or the stakeholders that we're trying to work with. We'll try to keep our examples really relevant to political campaigns. And again, really try to get that sense of empathy. Next, we try to provide clear, easy fixes, right? And this is a lot of how our overall approach. We're not going to do anything that involves, opening up a command line or anything super technical. We got to be simple, fast, cheap. We have to make people feel empowered, right? Because if you bring a bunch of doom and gloom and there's nothing you can do, and a determined adversary can totally pop everything you're doing and you're screwed, which is true, but maybe not likely, people aren't going to be as likely to change their behavior if they don't think it'll make a difference, right? Which is really important. If you want to change users' behavior, you have to make them feel empowered and make them feel that they can make a difference and their actions can make a difference. And lastly, we provide support. So we don't just go in and parachute and say, here's your security training and awareness and your Keys. Have a nice life. We stay involved. We have a Slack community for our current and previous campaigns. We're always reachable. And so maintaining constant support with our users, and again, it's not just a political campaign example, but it's oftentimes we're busy. We just want to chuck stuff over the fence and say, all right, here's a YubiKey, here's a thing, go configure it well. Doesn't always happen unless you need, sometimes you need a little bit of good touch, a little bit of light touch to get people, just on the path. And I think we've seen some really promising data, and we do collect data before and after we do our trainings, and again, and series of increments afterwards. And so we'll see pretty significant increases in the amount of users that are deploying multi-factor authentication, using password managers, or otherwise just deploying stronger passwords. And again, the goal is not to get into whether password managers are the most secure type of technology, because if you spend too much time on infosec Twitters, you know that there's some strong opinions there. But it's a hell of a lot better than what a lot of people are doing with their passwords and creating really weak passwords and storing them in very easily accessible places. We can even get these non-technical folks to encrypt their devices and turn on auto updates, which, again, especially on the former one, it's not something you'd expect your non-technical person to do. And pretty much everyone we train ends up adopting at least one secure behavior after 1 week. So we like to think that the approach that we are working on and continue to iterate on has actually been fairly successful in terms of changing user behavior. And again, we don't think this is necessarily true just for political campaigns, but potentially could be used more broadly. And so we have some lessons and goals from what we've done thus far and continue to do, and again continue to iterate on. The first, supporting good tech decisions early on is critical. Again, there might be some startup folks in the crowd, or folks who might start their own companies. Making those early good tech decisions early on makes all the difference. Again, from a political campaign perspective, picking out, using just a Squarespace or a Wix already puts you miles ahead of folks that are using, custom, web hosting services or some other old one that they found for free somewhere. They have some sort of discount on, right? Even if it costs a little bit of money. Enabling as much security by default as possible, especially behind the scenes. So, again, common examples that we focus on for political campaigns, but also, again, more broad in general, things like MFA, DMARC for emails. As much as, the ultimate goal for us is, can we make it as transparent as possible for the user to get all these security functions without getting them, they're essentially our clients, to have it, setting up for them. We're trying to develop this thing called campaign in a box, which is this concept where if somebody decides they want to, run a political campaign, start a political campaign, can we just provide them this, whatever it is, if it's a zip file, if it's a guide or a website, whatever, that just, opens everything up and sets everything up, pre-configured with all of the right security practices in place, has all the right secure tools. So, we'll recommend or help set up Signal automatically, as opposed to using Open SMS for MFA or for normal communications. How do you get as much of that secure by default, secure by design into like a one-click, everything we need is already there, right? And then lastly, for when there are cases, we're all busy, and we don't want to tell everyone to, RTFM, for example. Writing super simple guides is really important, but also, again, I say as a last resort because we want to make this stuff as transparent as possible, but having guides for people to walk through themselves, super important. And I also can't stress, having been in in and around the infosec community for a while, our guides aren't as simple as we think they are, right? Because we tend to think of them from our perspective, our technical aptitude. It's so clear what you do after you need to do this step, or where you go to find the or what happens if I get a phishing email. It's so clear to tell. I need to look through every single common advice people get is like in detecting suspicious links in phishing emails. You have to hover over the link and see where it's going and determine whether the domain is a trusted domain before you click on the link. None of that stuff makes sense to your average user, right? How do I hover? Like, even on most browsers, you hover over it, and in Chrome or Firefox, you see that tiny little banner at the bottom. Most people aren't going to look at that. And then how do they know if it's a trusted domain, right? They don't know if the Alexa top 1,000 domains are or what's verified. So a lot of this stuff, it just goes over most people's heads. And so, as a community, we just want to, good security is transparent security, because if anything is too inconvenient for users, they're not going to actually put into place better security behaviors. And then that's bad for us and for the overall efforts, obviously. Why should we care? So I'm talking about, helping secure, down ballot political campaigns, right? It's not the president, it's not the Pelosi's or the McConnells. Many of these folks lose, so it's just my state or local representative. They're probably not the most targeted victims for adversaries. Well, why am I here talking about this? Why should we as security professionals care? And I think there are a lot of reasons. So when we typically think about election security or political campaigns, we all tend to think about the same things. We think about 2016 was kind of the watershed year, at least for us domestically in the U.S. between Hillary's emails and her and John Podesta clicking on the link. That both the DNC and the DCCC both got compromised. We had allegations and activity around Russian behavior in 2016. And also, we always just think of compromised election machines, like the actual voting machines, which there's still much work to do, especially in that latter space. A lot of good work going on, but a lot of it, again, full of the problem. And as we'll talk about in a sec, not the only ways that the adversaries can make a large-scale impact, especially now that there's so much scrutiny and research going on, and we genuinely hope that continues. But it's a lot more common than folks think. And these are just a couple of high-level written up examples, because most of them go under the radar. So, there's a BEC attack on Wisconsin GOP in 2020 that lost $2.3 million, which again is a lot even for a state party. This was also a case in, I believe, 2020 as well, where a candidate realized that several of her accounts were compromised by IPs that allegedly sourced back to Russia and were accessing some files that they shouldn't have, and had exported some data. But I can't tell you how many anecdotes there are of people who've worked in political campaigns, even going back 6 or 8 years, that have somehow been compromised via phishing, hack and leak, getting names, sensitive information of donors. There's been a lot of doxing, a lot of trying to compromising email accounts and sending them out to donor lists or people to saying very not nice things to piss people off. But none of this stuff gets written up, and so we're always left to think about these very kind of high-level, high-powered issues when it's really happening all the time at all levels of political campaigns. And there's another kind of deeper problem here around opportunity and accountability. So, like many other things in life, the better resourced folks are at an advantage, right? So when we think about incumbents versus challengers, many of us probably, in civics class growing up, you learn that, and incumbents have a much higher rate of winning re-election. Part of it's because they have the name recognition, but they also have a lot of money, and money matters a lot. And money pays for better tech. Money pays for dedicated IT security staff, which many of these larger campaigns do. And again, these are things that are afforded mostly to incumbents or self-funded candidates, which obviously means wealthier candidates. And so when we think about, if we're trying to hold our current elected officials to account, or want to make sure that it's not just who has the most money so they can, either buy the most ads or secure, keep their campaign the most secure, that really puts challengers at a disadvantage. So we think about, if we want our governments to, work for the people, and we want to hold our elected officials accountable, and we want to make sure that people who are a little bit more, we don't just, like I said, we don't just have a bunch of more wealthy folks running for office. This is another thing that puts them at a disadvantage, right? You don't have that sort of those resources to, buy the right buy the right tech, or even just buy tech at all, or be able to recover if there is some sort of incident that might happen. And I think another thing that folks overlook too is the power of state and local, and again, down ballot campaigns. Even though we've learned, and again, it's very much part of the American ethos, the power of the federal government, which obviously, not dying the power of the federal government. We've also seen how much in recent years, states especially play huge roles in our everyday lives. We think about redistricting, right? So the 2020 census just happened. Maps are being, where everyone signs up, fills out the form, and then at the state level, new district maps are drawn that controls how many Congress people you have. That's where gerrymandering tends to happen. That's all run at the state level, right? So we think about how just keep it back to gerrymandering without going into anything partisan. That's power that state legislatures have and elected officials have. State laws. Again, we'll try to keep things without going into too many examples here, but everything from we've dealt with mask mandates or COVID-related regulations or laws at the state level. People are probably tracking that there's the leak out of the Supreme Court around abortion, where things get passed down back to the states, or when states are passing their laws about something that's contentious abortion. That's something that state elected officials control. Confirming judges at the state level, again, also falls on state officials. Many of these people will probably graduate from state and local level and go up to Congress or to other federal levels and amass more power. And also at the state level, states control their own elections, right? So you figure out who can vote. How easy is it to vote in a particular state? Or how easy is it to fill out an absentee ballot? How long are the polls open for? All of these things are controlled at the state level, and they're really, really powerful. And as we all know, they're a lot, typically more under the radar than federal races. It takes a lot fewer seats and votes to win than at federal races. And I think both parties have started to realize that there's actually a lot of power to be had at the state level, and actually either bypassing at the federal level, or when there's a lot of gridlock federally in Washington, D.C., whether it's responding to the pandemic or passing laws that might affect people's freedoms or ability to do what they need to do. There's a lot of power for folks who are running for state and local office. So our overall theory, and on the darker side of prediction, we think that adversaries can actually have a pretty significant impact on U.S. political divisions, our internal conflict, our culture, and our policy, but influencing large amounts of local elections rather than trying to interfere at the top level races, where there's a lot more scrutiny, there's a lot more money, there's a lot more people's eyes on it. And even as we've seen now, with all the gridlock in D.C., the president and Congress aren't putting out as much as each of them would like or think they're capable of putting out. So it stands to reason, and again, I think we start to see a little bit of this, and especially when we think about certain adversaries' ultimate objectives, when we think about disinformation and past elections, is you actually have a pretty serious impact on other countries by impacting local elections, which again, much lower barriers to entry. I talked earlier about the low sophistication of technology, the lack of people doing security in this field. And so as an adversary, maybe not a bad idea, or maybe if there's some, maybe there's a particular state, or, again, the Senate right now is very, very close. Even a couple seats can swing it from one party to the other. And we all know the Senate is also incredibly important at the federal level. It's not too far-fetched to think that for a particularly close race that might tip the Senate one way or the other, or Congress one way or the other, a determined adversary can start, trying to meddle with particular elections, or even the folks that might feed up to that in a couple of cases. And we think this is only going to get easier for adversaries. Circling back to the little DDoS story at the beginning on the campaign we used, it turned out it was probably a variant of the Hulk DDoS. I don't know if variant is the right word or tool for folks who are familiar with the Hulk tool. It's basically kind of like a very easy download, plug and play DDoS tool that generates a fairly sophisticated set of requests that makes it pretty hard to block unless you have more sophisticated tools. We also have changing business models within our adversaries' infrastructure. DDoS as a service, just general things as a service, right? You can access as a service. There are a lot of tools you can just plug and play. So again, back in the case that I dealt with back in 2018, this was a guy who I think was like a web developer, maybe an IT guy, who just went online and they literally, government found his browser searches looking for like DDoS tool, and he downloaded it. He used his credit card. He was actually able to have an impact. And this is not going to get any harder for your average script kiddie to be able to get access to decent tools to cause some sort of consequences. Speaking of consequences, they're very few. It's still again, few eyes, so very rare that any of this stuff gets caught. It's really unclear which U.S. law enforcement agency has jurisdiction over this, right? FBI won't touch anything unless it's of a certain level, like Congress or above, or if there's a certain amount of damages that were done. CISA does general election security, but may not necessarily jump into specific political campaigns and it's not a law enforcement agency. Other parts of DHS, it's really unclear. When I was on this campaign, it was unclear who we turned to. who would actually be able to help us at the time. And again, the legal framework, and this could be, like a separate talk, because this case might be pushing a new precedent or setting a new precedent when it comes to election interference and challengers for congressional campaigns. There's not really much of a legal framework there. So, we see the access is getting easier. There are very few consequences. And with minimal effort, you can have a surprising amount of impact if you're able to impact people's fundraising, or again, hack and leak, any of the kind of typical TTPs, if you will, that might actually cause an impact in a political campaign context. And it really could have worked in this little district that I worked on back in 2018. Like I mentioned, the primary point that my candidate lost to ended up going to Congress. And, until they had to resign under some interesting circumstances, shall we say, had a seat at tables, was on certain committees, had a very bright future in their party. So again, people don't really think about that kind of longer tail of what might happen. And again, it's unclear, and I'm not going to presuppose that these DDoS attacks made the candidate I worked for lose, right, or affected the votes too much. This also wasn't a very sophisticated adversary. But if it was intentional, or it could have been intentional, or somebody tries a similar thing in a different jurisdiction, they can have the same impact. That could be someone you could be sending to Congress, sitting on really powerful committees, having oversight, be launching a very strong career for the long term in the country. That can have a huge impact. So I wanted to end, one last thing before I end is, so kind of the so what and what to take action here, right? We have a community of infosec experts on all sides. So what can we do? Because we're all busy and defending our own enterprises and have our own jobs. But first, simply just work or volunteer on local campaigns. Even just the really basic stuff, like I said, like getting people on using Gmail, even Microsoft, both of them have free services available for political campaigns. Just setting up basic services, getting them to use YubiKeys, just your really, really basic stuff. Doesn't take that much time out of your day. Gives you that nice fuzzy feeling of participating in, local democracy and, getting out your civic duty. Or what a lot of people start doing, just, if you can, for those who can, actually work on a political campaign. You can take, many people from tech will take a hiatus if they can, or leave their job to actually go do security for larger campaigns during campaign cycles. And there's also been a lot more stuff. There's been some interesting security tools that have been developed in the open source community for political campaigns. So there's a lot that can be done there. Again, especially as policy becomes a larger and larger issue. And, I know the policy village at DEF CON kind of got off the ground last year, and we hope that there's more coming this year. We want to continue to educate our lawmakers and our elected officials, not only about the threat, but also all of these gaps on lower down, down ballot campaigns, right? Jurisdiction question, the statute question. How should we treat someone who achieves some sort of negative adverse impact on a political campaign, right? We don't want to have CFA type rules where we can't press F12 in certain states without threatening to be put in jail. But what constitutes real intent versus just our normal scanning or testing or really basic stuff. And lastly, if you just the really easy out is just Foresight. We're always looking for volunteers. We have a lot of campaigns to work with. We try to have fun with it. And again, pretty much all we do is free. It's all volunteer. So I'm not paid. My partner Alex isn't paid. So we're just trying to spend some of our free time making the country a little bit more secure. And then this is just one thing. If people can amuse me for a sec while I get up on a soapbox real quick before I open stuff for Q&A. I also sometimes get this, and we all probably know some of these folks, but I don't really care about politics. Politics is really my thing. I'm just going to focus on doing my little infosec thing over here. And I just have to say on the soapbox, everything is politics, right? If you care about privacy and you're in this room, you care about politics. If you care about security policy and regulation, you care about politics. If you care about legalizing marijuana or abortion or the First Amendment or what's going on in Russia and Ukraine, you care about politics. And these local elected officials that may start out in your neighborhood area or at the state level that you may or may not be voting for, or may not be aren't thinking of necessarily going to support. These are the people who are going to go end up making these decisions in however many years when they move up the ladder and get elected at the federal level. So I really just this is the soapbox moment of everything is politics. And so, especially as infosec professionals, we have a lot of this knowledge. We have the ability to make can impact and to educate a wide swath of this really critical sector, if you will, that is really has an outsized impact on our work, right? We think about end-to-end encryption, all these other things we talk about. Making sure we have cyber literate elected officials is super important. And one great way to get there is to work on their campaigns and make sure they know about what threats are out there and what they can do and why this stuff is so important. So it really doesn't take too much time out of our normal lives. So I highly recommend, especially in this 2022 midterm cycle, reach out to your local campaigns. No one's going to say no. Everyone's a little bit suspicious when you say, hey, I want to help with free cyber services. So, but at the end of the day, when you meet someone in person or over a Zoom, especially if you can offer your services for free or discounted rate, because they're not going to charge our full private sector IR rates or whatnot, everyone's going to say yes, and people will be glad to have you in to help out. And it's, again, just a really great way to give back to our country and make sure we have a well-functioning democracy. And that's it. So thanks so much for sticking around and for listening to this talk, especially at the end of usually this time in San Diego. I know people are either hitting the beach or getting drinks, so people have already started probably doing that. But thanks for those who stuck around. And again, I'm always happy to talk to folks about some of the work we're doing or just some of the things we've seen in general. So here's my email, which people are more than welcome to reach out to. And feel free to follow Foresight on Twitter. We're not the most active Twitter account, but you can also follow me personally. I tend to post just a little bit more, but also not too much. So, but thanks again, and thanks for having me. Okay, I see we have some questions here from Discord. All right. I've worked in a state election office for 20 years. The designation of elections as critical infrastructure in 2017 has been a game changer for state and local jurisdictions. Do you think the effects of that designation has trickled down to the campaigns? This is a fantastic question. And just for background, critical infrastructure, and I deal with this a lot, especially as I mentioned, my normal day job, is an important designation that can get money, authorities, funding, better support from the government, etc. Thus far, from what I've seen, a lot of this, kind of like that slide about what we normally think about securing elections, it's really focused on secretaries of state and their offices and securing election systems, which again, super important. I have not seen this go down to the political campaigns because they're not tied to government, right? They're almost like little mini startups. They get their information from their local committees. And even the committees, like on the Democrat and Republican side, are often private entities. So they don't really fall under the same auspices and are not really getting a lot of support from government or from other places. So again, most political campaigns we see, they just get these checklists and it's go do whatever. Or maybe one person happened to do something in tech beforehand, and that person becomes a dedicated IT tech security person on the campaign. So I think that's a great point of if we're able to extend that protection or that designation to political campaigns, have to think about that logistically. That might make a bit of a difference. But right now, it's really just focused at the government level, at the state government level, on kind of protecting their election infrastructure. Another question: the issues that the campaign I had in 2018 of not knowing who or how to report to. So I think that's gotten better in 2022. Do campaigns know that information now? I don't think it's gotten much easier. I still don't necessarily know what the right answer is or who would help support. Usually when we work with campaigns, we say, hey, reach out to us and we'll figure out what kind of where to go from there. Most campaigns have no idea. So they don't know about CISA. CISA is also fairly new. CISA, again, also not a law enforcement agency. Really will just, CISA will help kind of collect information to see if there are larger trends going on, for example. FBI, a lot of people are afraid to reach out to FBI for various reasons. Or just they don't even realize that the FBI would even care about their small political campaign. DHS also has other little, cyber components across the agencies that do some of this work. So the short answer is no, I don't think it's gone any easier. I don't think it's clear. If you're in a city like you're in New York, you've got New York Cyber Command, or LA and Chicago, I think have some kind of citywide security teams, and even some at the states do. Most people, I don't even know which states have, all the states that have local cybersecurity support. So that's another thing I think would be low-hanging fruit, either for the government or for states, or even if someone out there builds a nice little web app that says, hey, I put in my zip code or my state, and based on that, here are all of the federal, state, local security resources I can reach out to. That's a huge win. And if somebody ends up doing that, I've had some ideas, so feel free to reach out. And those are all the Q&As that I'm seeing in the chats. Here's a different one from the Q&A. How the HE double hockey sticks? Do you get people to use a password manager? You have to walk them through several passwords. Sometimes yes, and sometimes no. I think the best sell for password managers is just, again, telling the story of how easy it is, right? Instead of saying you're doing passwords wrong, install this software that's going to be kind of hard to use at first. I tell people, hey, I have a tool that makes, I don't have to think about passwords anymore. I don't have to create passwords. I don't have to remember my passwords. I don't even have to write them into my browser or whatnot, my phone anymore. And that usually gets people their eyebrows up with, oh crap, I hate passwords. And everyone yells at me for them. What tool can I use to make me never have to worry about passwords? And sometimes just to show, I have an iPhone here. I'll even show them the whole integration with, your LastPass or 1Password, and it links to your Face ID. And I think that was some great user design on Apple's behalf. And not that I'm endorsing them. I know iOS much better than Android. But again, just showing those bits make it a lot easier. And then, yes, sometimes you do have to walk people through, or we'll handle the setup on the back end. And then again, the really easy followable guides makes a big difference. And like anything else, people need 1 or 2 reps, and they're usually good to go from there. But again, you have to talk, just a general thing, not just in security, but you have to think about the frame of the audience that you're trying to connect with, right? If I just think about everything in my frame, I can talk about threats and adversaries and security and TTPs. That's not how they think. They think about passwords suck and I hate them and I don't remember them all the time. So what can I do to make my life less crappy thanks to passwords? And if you can speak to them in that way, you'll end up getting a lot better uptake. I'll try to stick around Discord. Sorry, I've been running around. I'm back here on the East Coast, but thanks to Wild West Hackin Fest for having me to speak with you all. Really appreciate it. And again, please don't be a stranger. Feel free to reach out. Always happy to connect with folks in the community and bring people in on this really important issue. So thanks so much. Go enjoy beers. I don't know if there's anything afterwards. Again, sorry I can't be there with you all. And enjoy the rest of the con.
I don't think he can hear me, and I don't think you can hear me. I want to thank Dan, because we in the state of Michigan are using some of the information he has. We've got a part of the offshoot of the volunteers that I manage, the reactive part. We have a proactive part in Michigan called Cyber Partners that works with local and regional governments. Some of those run elections. And so we've been working with folks like Dan to try and educate the local county clerks, because these folks, like county clerk, can get elected without knowing how the election is run. They do a lot of other stuff. So they can get elected and pretty shortly have to run an election. And they don't always have the background to be able to defend themselves against concerned citizens. So we're going to try and go out and do an education effort, and that is going to use some of our cyber volunteers. This might be an effort. I don't know if this effort is going on in your state, wherever you're from, but maybe. So reach out. This is a place that really, really needs, you look out at what's going on in the news. We have a chance as cyber defenders to be in the information space, not just the technical space. So pay attention. Thank you for supporting this effort. Thanks, Dan. He looks like he's just nodding.
Yeah, I can hear you. Thanks so much. Really appreciate it.